My name's Greg Gilbert. I'm the senior pastor of Third Avenue Baptist Church in Louisville. I've been married to Mariah for almost 18 years now, and we have 3 kids, Justin, Jack, and Juliet. I grew up in a very, very small town in East Texas called Linden, Texas. When I was growing up there, it was maybe 2,500 people, something like that. Grew up in a Christian home. Both my parents are and were wonderful Christian people. We were in church every Sunday at the First Baptist Church of Linden, Texas. In about the middle of my junior year, I started looking at colleges, mostly in Texas, but among the many brochures that different colleges sent to me, there was one in the stack from Yale University, and I was just a little bit starstruck by that. So I applied, went and visited, and found myself sitting around a lunch table actually with an Orthodox Jewish woman, a Rastafarian, and an atheist. And we just had the most wonderful, frustrating, wide-ranging conversation about religion that eventually wound down to the gospel. And by the end of that, I was convinced I need to be in the middle of this. So I went. I really had no desire to go into the ministry for the first year, maybe even a little bit more of college. In fact, I remember being in a car driving one weekend to New York City with a Baptist Campus Ministries staff member, and he asked me about ministry, and I just laughed and said, no, I've never had a single desire in my life to go into Christian ministry, and I don't think the Lord is going to give me any of those desires. Well, in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, I went to a camp in Texas, a youth camp. I was a counselor, and by the end of that week, everything was changed. I think the Lord just flipped switches in my heart that I didn't even know existed, just a desire for the spiritual well-being of these kids that I was responsible for. And when I got back to school, it took about a year for me to sort of figure this out and pick up the pieces of my ambitions and desires and all the rest and realize, I think this is what I want to do. But by the end of sophomore year, I was on that path. In the summer of '02, my new wife, Mariah, and I moved here to Louisville so that I could begin work on a Master of Divinity. We joined Third Avenue immediately. 8 years later, in 2010, the church called me as senior pastor, which was an amazing thing because over those 8 years, I had just grown to love this church, for one thing. I love who it is. I love what it is. I love that it's sitting right on the campus of the University of Louisville. So the things that I learned at Yale about contending for the faith are every single day in play here, sitting next to this major research university. There's so much I love about pastoring. I love the leadership aspect of it. I love sitting down over coffee with college students and talking about the gospel. I love seeing what the Lord does in people's lives as the preaching of the word happens. I love preaching. I think of all the things I do as a pastor, the preaching of the word is the most important, and it's the thing I love the most too. I love studying the Bible. I love figuring out what it means, and then I love explaining that to the congregation and seeing the light bulbs turn on throughout the congregation. It's fun. I'm committed to going through books of the Bible. That's how I preach. We start at the beginning, we go to the end. And one of the things I actually ironically love about that is that it forces me to preach the hardest texts in the Bible. You just can't avoid them. And what I've found is that if you do avoid them in preaching, you're missing all kinds of glory and all kinds of benefit in those texts. I don't think the Lord would have put them in there if they weren't useful and encouraging to Christians. So I preach them, and we find all kinds of good in them. At T4G 20, the title of my talk is What is and Isn't the Gospel? I know it might be tempting to think, I'm a preacher, I know what the gospel is, so why do I need to listen to another talk like that? But in 1 Corinthians 15, the very first thing Paul says in that chapter is, I want to remind you, brothers, of the gospel which you received back in the day. Every generation of Christians is going to be confronted with challenges to the gospel, attempts to twist the gospel into something it's not, attempts to take things away from the gospel or add things to the gospel. And what we have to do generation after generation is redefine it according to the scriptures and stand on the truth of what the gospel actually is.